Hey, I'd like to welcome you to another episode of the Mission Matters Business Podcast, your source for all things business. My name is Adam Torres. You can follow me on Instagram at AskAdamTorres. Keep up with my book releases, book tour schedule, signings, all that other good stuff. Always love to connect with you there. And as always, if you'd like to apply to become a co-author of one of my upcoming books, just head on over to the website, missionmatters.com, and click on Become an Author to apply. All right, today I have Kishen Newton on the line, and she is a creator, author, speaker, and also podcast host over at Stories with Kishen. Kishen, welcome to the show.
Thank you. So excited to be with you.
All right, so I'm excited to get today's topic. So the importance of personal development for women in business. So, it's a hot topic. Lots of people listening, business owners, entrepreneurs, executives. Where do you want to start with this one?
I think I'll start from, and I usually, when talking with people, to make it tangible and real, I start with myself and my own experiences. So what I've learned over the years is that it is really important to develop yourself, whether you're a leader, you're in leadership, whether it's with the community, within your own company, whatever it is, you need to first examine what you're doing as a contributor to whatever you're connected to. And so that's what I've been doing over the past several months, is looking at what I've done and how can I contribute to my community, how can I contribute to my podcast, how can I contribute in any area that I'm working with. So I can give you a couple of examples.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's just jump right in. Give us an example, please.
Okay. So one example that I like to use and that I've used quite frequently is when I am assessing where I am in my career. And most women who are listening, they've been at that point. They're thinking, I don't know if I like where I am. I want to go somewhere else. I want to go further. I want to go higher, whatever it is. And so along with that comes the research to find out where you're going to go. So for me, I am a big note taker. I have a checkoff list of what it is that I'm looking to accomplish. So say, for example, there was one position that I knew I wanted to get to the next level. And so I started talking to my supervisor, my director, the general manager where I was working, letting them know what my plans were. Sometimes we don't do that as women. We will either sit and wait for somebody to notice us, or we might talk to somebody and they're not the person of influence or the person that we need to speak to. But what I'm finding is that we have to be a little bit more, we have to be in the driver's seat regarding our career. And sometimes we take a back seat to that and let other people steer us in the direction that they want us to go in. Even with, and I didn't mention this prior to, but even the book that I'm in the midst of writing that will be launched later on this year speaks specifically to the different quicksand traps that we fall into as women, as professionals, that sort of veer us off the direction that we want to go on, but we can eventually wiggle our way back to where we need to be. So I guess first and foremost is find out where you want to go. How do you get there? Talking to the right people, and then taking the next step, which could be training, seeking out, and I think it's important to mention this too as well. When I set my sight on something, if there's not somebody who I can talk to that's in my sphere of influence, sometimes you have to Google somebody who's in that space to see what steps they took to get there. So there's so many different ways that we can look for where we want to go without actually talking to somebody. So we have to think outside the box sometimes.
So what, I know this is going to vary from person to person, obviously, but from your perspective, what are some of the things that you feel kind of hold people back from pursuing that personal development path?
I think fear. I think that's the biggest. People become immobilized by fear, and that's actually one of my quotes. I have a Kishen's food for thought where whatever comes to mind, I'll share it. And one of those is fear is the immobilizer of many people achieving their goals. Fear of, I don't have what it takes to make it. Fear of, what if I try and I fail? Fear of, I can't do this because nobody who looks like me has ever done it. So people will let that fear immobilize them. But then when you get to the point where you're like, you know what, I'm over this fear thing. This is something that I can't shake. It's something that I got to do. Then you start chipping away at that fear by just taking the steps. And you have to take those steps, how big or small, to get to that point. And even with my book, I have another book that precedes this one. But in order for me to get started, because I started writing like 15, 20 years ago, but I've not published anything yet. But I am going to do that because I can't shake it. It's something within me. And I think people need to just hear a story that connects with them before they think that they're the ones who can achieve it as well.
Let's get a little bit into your podcast. So I want to talk more about that because I love promoting podcasters, other podcasters to my community, and also building the podcasting community. Huge advocate of podcasting in general. So Stories with Kishen. What tell us a little bit more about the type of content that you produce there.
Stories with Kishen is actually a podcast that, I'm just talking about, was just sharing how sometimes you have to guide yourself versus other people guiding you, was actually placed in my lap. In addition to being a podcaster, I also co-hosted a radio program, and the producer was like, Kishen, you really need to start this podcast. I'm like, no, I don't want to do that. No, he said, but you ask great questions. I'm like, yeah, but that's not really what I want to do. But every time in the interview, I would ask those questions, those thought-provoking questions that people want to know but nobody ever asked. And so I reached out to a couple people who I knew. One is a CEO of a healthcare facility in my area in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And the other one, she is the global VP of HR who travels literally around the world and trains people in other countries. So I reached out to both of them and I said, hey, I'm starting this podcast. Would you do me the honor in being one of my first guests? And they both happen to be women. But when I met with them, the premise of the podcast is based on a Bible scripture, Revelations 12 and 11, which says we overcome him by the blood of the Lamb and the words of our testimony. And my hope is when people share or listen to the podcast, they will connect with some of the nuggets that were shared by the women, by the people who I've interviewed. I've interviewed men and women, but they will connect with that and it will draw them out of their place of being stuck. Say, for example, one of the young ladies that I interviewed, she was incarcerated. She thought when she came back into, I guess, civilian life, she was stuck. She thought that she couldn't get a job anywhere or anything. So in her mind, she thought she was stuck. But she started praying about it, and God started opening up doors for her. And she eventually became the business owner of a pretty successful salon. But she said it took for somebody else to give her the encouragement to overcome being incarcerated or the stigma that's attached to it. There was another, a guy who I interviewed. He lost his wife to breast cancer, and he talked about being in a place of being stuck. He didn't know what to do. He was a father of three young people. His daughter, I think, had just started college, and then he had a son that was in high school and one was in middle school. So he's trying to figure out how do I do this? What can I do? But in his testimony and his story that he shared on Stories with Kishen, he talked about getting help, getting counseling, not letting society dictate, well, you're not supposed to get counseling. You'll be fine. You do it this way. And everybody has all this advice. But he said, wait a minute, this isn't working for me. I need to seek professional counseling so I can get through this unstuckedness. There was another young man. He had been molested as a child, which absolutely broke my heart. I'm in tears, crying like, how could this happen? But he talked, too, about seeking professional help to get from that place of being stuck. But a lot of times, especially in communities of color, people won't do that. They won't seek counseling because it's taboo. And so they stay in those places of abuse, of lack, poverty, whatever it is, because they don't believe that there's any other way out. But listening to the podcast, I've had people comment, this happened to me too. I'm glad that you said this because now I can go get the help that I need. And so those are the types of stories that I've been able to share, that people have shared with me by way of my podcast, that I think have been really impactful.
Wow, that's absolutely amazing. What a service you are doing with this podcast. And I'm glad that radio producer made you go do it, because you are doing a service. And this is why I like promoting other podcasters, because it's beautiful. I love the podcasting community. It's amazing. So Kishen, that being said, if somebody's listening to this and they want to connect with your work, whether as you to pick up your writing as you start publishing, and or to listen to the podcast, or to learn more about your speaking, I mean, what's the best way for people to connect with you and your brand overall?
I am on Facebook, Stories with Kishen. That is the podcast. You can also listen to Stories with Kishen on SoundCloud, Stories with Kishen, Twitter, at Kishen E, so Kishene, and then on Instagram at Just Kishen. So those are the different ways of contacting me. Or if somebody wants to email me, of course that's the old-fashioned way, but hey, I'm up for it. I'm at Kishen, KISHENNJ at hotmail.com. I know I still have Hotmail. Call me ancient, but you know what? It works.
That's funny. At least it wasn't AOL. We're good. It's all good. Huh?
Right.
So, some people still have that, and I'm going to probably get an email or two from our listeners like, what do you have against that? I'm sorry. Gosh, get over it. All right.
Hey, yeah.
So, Kishen, really appreciate you coming on the show today and sharing more about all the great work you're doing. Also about your amazing podcast, Stories with Kishen. I want my listeners to definitely go look that up on SoundCloud and connect with that. And to the audience, as always, thank you for tuning in. Hope you got a lot of value out of this. If you did, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, leave me a review on the Apple iTunes Store, and if you're watching this on our YouTube channel, Mission Matters Business, definitely give us a subscribe there, but also leave us some comments in the video. Love to know what kind of projects and things that you're working on. And Kishen, thanks again for coming on the show.
Thank you again.